A night convoy rolled into Donbass, and something in the valley felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean, too controlled. What followed was not a duel of big guns, but a contest of timing, sensors, and nerves. Roads that looked open were already mapped, and lanes that seemed safe were waiting to lock targets the moment steel crossed a line. The story here is not one secret superweapon. It is a chain that moves fast. Drones find, data flows, decisions snap, and layered fire arrives before engines can turn. Crews tried smoke and speed, yet the ground trapped them, while eyes in the dark kept feeding coordinates that never slept. This is the new shape of battle. Low-cost tools working with high-end artillery, and small teams breaking big formations because the clock is on their side. Stay with Military Force. Subscribe now, because this report walks through how a single valley flipped the momentum, and why the next push may face the same invisible wall. We'll start with the night approach, then the prepared kill valley, before moving into the mine shock, the precision fires, and the final collapse, step by step, without spoilers, but with the signals that matter. A Russian-coordinated armored column moved into Donbass under darkness, and the plan relied on speed, discipline, and tight links between scouts and guns. The lead elements were T-62 and T-72 tanks, while BTR-80 carriers and BMP-2 infantry vehicles held the flanks and rear, and this mix gave protection, mobility, and dismounts for close tasks. Crews kept lights off, used thermal sights, and followed preset waypoints, and commanders favored narrow roads that cut radar exposure and kept noise low. Artillery spotters went ahead in small teams, marked lanes, and watched for signatures that revealed ambush points, and their short reports kept the net clear for fire missions. Orlan 10 drones circled at modest altitude, scanned for engine heat, and tracked dust plumes on dirt spurs, and those eyes turned scattered cues into a moving picture that fed the map in real time. The doctrine was simple but sharp, because reconnaissance fed fire, fire shaped the route, and the route carried armor through before the defender could reset. Crews practiced radio brevity, rotated call signs, and avoided long bursts on the net, and electronic discipline kept them harder to fix by passive sensors. The columns staggered spacing to avoid bunching, used brief smoke to mask turns, and pushed bridging kits in the center to handle small gaps, and that balance of tools let the group keep momentum without wasting fuel. Tanks covered intersections with coaxial fire when needed, but they saved main guns for hard targets, and that restraint limited muzzle flash and kept thermal bloom down. The infantry riding BMP-2s scanned tree lines with optics, checked culverts with quick pairs, and flagged anything that looked freshly disturbed, and these small checks protected the larger force without slowing it to a crawl. Orlan 10 relayed grid updates to batteries on standby, and when spotters flagged a probable observation post or a suspected team with anti-tank gear, guns could fire a short, tight salvo to clear the path. The loop closed fast because drones confirmed effects, spotters corrected, and the column rolled again before dust settled, and that rhythm mattered more than raw numbers. Night action reduced satellite glare and made shape detection harder, and cool air helped engines run steady. Yet night also punished small errors, since a missed turn or a confused signal could stall steel in a choke. The plan therefore leaned on rehearsed drills, preloaded routes, and a clear hierarchy for fire requests, and each piece fit the next like links in a chain. From a distance, the movement looked routine, almost calm, and the lines of armor seemed to breathe as they crept along the valley. But the quiet on the ground hid a contest of timing that could flip in a minute. With sensors humming and the net alive, the formation believed the corridor was open and the clock was theirs, which is exactly when the prepared valley began to show its true shape and purpose. Ukraine built a kill zone in advance, and the design joined terrain, mines, and live data into one tight plan. Engineers walked the map first, and they marked choke points where the road pinched, curved, or dipped near culverts. They buried anti-tank charges on approach lanes, and they laid secondary belts across likely turnouts and farm tracks. Each corridor had different fuses, so pressure, tilt, and magnetic triggers would not fire as a single pattern. The aim was simple yet strict, because the first blast had to stop steel, while the second wave had to stack targets into a dense cluster. Small UAVs scanned every bend, and special forces confirmed landmarks at night with low-light optics. They logged poles, ditches, and fresh earth, and they stored grids in fire control tablets. Those coordinates sat preloaded, and crews rehearsed who would call, who would shoot, and who would correct. The network did not rely on one model of drone, since mixed fleets cut risk, and cheap airframes could be replaced in hours. Brave 1 programs pushed rapid tweaks to radios and software, and that kept links stable when jamming rose and fell. The minefields were not straight lines. They were pockets that caught tracks during turns and forced heavy hulls to slow. Gaps looked real but were false, and decoy markers nudged drivers toward dead ground. Where the lane widened, extra charges sat deeper, and that depth hid signatures from quick sweeps. Tripwires were kept short, and command sets stayed off until observers saw the right silhouette. If one device failed, another angle waited a few meters away. Electronics mattered as much as steel, so teams cut emissions and used brief bursts to pass target nodes. Relays sat behind hills, and mesh nodes moved with quadcopters, so the picture stayed fresh even when one link died. Thermal cameras watched for idling engines, while acoustic mics picked up gear shifts, and those cues confirmed what the eye saw. Every sensor had a job, and no single tool carried the load, which made disruption harder and recovery faster. This discipline kept the timeline short and the fire plan honest. Guns had their zones marked days earlier, and 155mm batteries like Caesar crews drilled quick missions on those presets. Observers could push a short correction, and shells would arrive on time, yet the first goal was still to trap, not to destroy. Only when weight built up on the road would the plan turn from holding to hitting, because crowded armor turns shock into results. With routes fixed, lanes mined, and grids ready, the stage was set for the moment when the first blast would halt the lead tank and massed fires would follow. The first blast stopped the lead tank, and the jam that followed turned a moving force into a wall of steel that could not breathe. The driver tried to reverse, but tracks bit into churned soil, and the hull slid sideways into a shallow ditch. Radios spiked with short, confused calls, while smoke from ruptured fuel blurred the lane and hid fresh obstacles. Vehicles behind swung left and right to find space, yet overlapping belts caught the second line, and pressure fuses fired as weight shifted across the crown of the road. The effect was simple but brutal, because speed died in seconds, and mass piled up where the ground narrowed. Once movement stalled, the geometry of fire changed, and density became the defender's advantage. Range tables and preset grids meant artillery did not have to search, and crews already knew which squares would hold the greatest value. Gunners looked for command tracks with extra antennas, fuel bowsers with wider tanks, and ammo haulers riding low, since those targets break a formation faster than a dozen hull kills. A single hit on a radio truck can blind two companies, while a burning tanker can block a lane and feed secondary blasts. When shock spreads along headsets, orders lose force, and that moment opens a window for precise strikes. HIMARS fits that window well, because guided rockets reach deep with tight error margins, and public assessments have shown strong results against headquarters and depots. When a fire mission lands on a node that holds maps, batteries, and officers, the route loses a brain, and local teams must guess. When a strike finds a dispersed ammo stack, the chain of supply kinks, and loaders ration shells at the worst time. These hits do not always destroy every hull, yet they tear out functions that keep armor moving, and a stalled line soon becomes a target range. That is why indirect fire often aims at what gives orders and fuel, not only at what wears armor. The rate of fire matters here, and Ukraine's 155mm units trained to move fast on prearranged zones, while platforms like Caesar keep shoot-and-scoot times short. French industry promised fresh lines for 2025, and manufacturer notes speak of high usage by crews in theater, which supports the sustained tempo seen at the front. A quick correction from observers can tighten patterns, and airburst fuses punish exposed crews who open hatches to breathe. When shells bracket a choke, each blast pushes drivers to hesitate, and hesitation stacks more metal into the kill area. This is how one mine detonation creates a cascade, because physics, fear, and planning all pull in the same direction. With engines idling and command nets fraying, the field reached the point where fires could turn a halt into a rout, which leads directly to how 155mm batteries and HIMARS executed the strike plan in layered waves. Drones moved in after the barrages, and the plan shifted from braking movement to finishing what still ran. Pilots steered FPV craft along hedges and ditches, then climbed late to strike from above, because thin top plates and warm engine decks fail faster than thick frontal armor. Small quadcopters hovered higher and painted survivors with laser or infrared marks, while controllers on the ridge pushed fresh grids to fire control, so the kill chain stayed tight and calm. The preferred angle was simple: come low to dodge fragments, rise over the turret ring, and drop a shaped or thermobaric charge onto vents, hatches, or the rear compartment. A hit on the power pack forced crews to bail, and flames often spread to stowed rounds or lines carrying fuel. Where cages or nets sat over the roof, pilots threaded gaps or aimed at the joint between the turret and hull, and that seam proved hard to shield without blocking guns. Electronic warfare changed the rhythm, yet units adapted with mixed links, stronger antennas, and short bursts of control data. Operators trimmed flight paths to reduce time in the jammed zone, and some airframes carried preset routes that would finish the run, even if guidance dropped. When smoke cut cameras, thermal cues still showed idling steel and exhaust heat, and those cues helped pick the right machine in a crowded lane. Not every attack hit cleanly, because wind, splash, and counterjamming all add friction, yet overall influence stayed large since reconnaissance never stopped. Spotter drones floated outside small arms range, counted hulls, and watched for open hatches, and that live picture told batteries where to place the next pattern. Field studies have linked a significant share of vehicle losses to UAV activity, but single mission success still swings with weather, clutter, and the level of interference. That is why commanders judge the drone layer by effect over time, rather than by any one sortie. FPV teams worked in pairs, and the first craft forced a turn while the second aimed for the engine bay or ammo stow. When a loader reached for a spare belt, or a driver popped the hatch for air, airburst fuses punished that brief exposure, and shrapnel drove crews back under armor. Recovery trucks tried to pull damaged hulls to the side, but drones targeted tow bars and winch lines, which froze the rescue and kept the road blocked. With survivors marked and repair efforts stalled, the drone screen held pressure while batteries prepared another short mission, and that tempo left little space for a clean regroup. At ground level, the noise of rotors mixed with the thud of delayed blasts, and every pause invited another strike. Under that constant drag, the formation began to look for a way out, which is when small anti-tank teams stepped from cover and the attempted breakout met hard fire. The counterattack tried to punch through under cover, and the plan leaned on speed, smoke, and loud suppressive fire. Tanks fired coaxial guns into tree lines while loaders kept belts moving, and dust screens hid turret turns for short bursts. The lane was narrow, the shoulders were soft, and burned hulls already pinched the road, so momentum bled away in meters, not miles. Thermal glare bounced off hot wrecks and confused aiming cues, while drivers rode ruts that forced the same path again and again. Crews pushed hard because hesitation kills in a valley, yet every shove met fresh clutter and fresh fear. That set the stage for small anti-tank teams to decide the fight, which is where mass alone could not help. Light infantry waited in depth, and each team owned a small slice of ground that had been walked many times. A pair with NLAW covered the near bend, and a javelin cell watched the rise, while an AT-4 gunner held a short alley for a mobility kill. Shooters picked top attack angles against thin plates, and they aimed at engine decks, turret rings, and rear corners where armor is weakest. The drill was crisp: fire from cover, let the backblast clear, and displace before the response arrived. Crossfires cut blind spots, decoys soaked machine gun bursts, and short radio calls kept the net clean of panic. With optics fogged and hatches shut, crews could not spot the flank, so the window for a clean push closed in seconds, which is how local skill beats heavy weight. Overhead, spotter drones kept the picture alive, and that mattered because the field kept changing every minute. Small copters marked survivors, mortars walked airburst patterns along the choke, and quick salvos punished any pause near a wreck. Recovery trucks tried to pull stricken hulls aside, but tow bars drew fire, and winch lines snapped under stress. Routes to the rear were no safer than the road ahead, since command-detonated charges sat on reverse slopes and cut the turnouts. Electronic noise rose and fell as jammers hunted links, yet mesh nodes shifted and restored short paths for targeting updates. When exits shrink faster than orders move, momentum flips to the defender, which is why the jam turns into a trap. Only a handful of tanks reached open ground, and several were mobility kills that could not steer or reload. Fuel trucks were gone, ammo stocks were low, and field repairs under drone shadow proved too slow for the moment. Crews faced a hard choice between burning engines or cold armor, and many bailed when fire rolled through the rear deck. Prisoners walked with hands up along ditches, and scattered groups tried to slip out across fields that were still mapped for guns. Commanders looked for a rally point, but the clock and the ground both said no, and the window for any breakout closed for good. From here, the field belonged to those who held the map and could clear the debris, which is where the final accounting begins. Integrated sensing and fast decisions beat raw firepower when terrain and mines are used with discipline. The lesson is clear because a linked kill chain turns minutes into leverage, and stalled armor becomes easy to shape with planned fires. Attackers can adapt only by clearing lanes from standoff range, lowering electronic signatures, splitting columns, and using decoys to soak drones. They also need better breaching kits, smarter smoke, and tighter radio habits, or the same choke points will trap them again. Defenders will double down on layered obstacles, night FPV teams, and preset 155mm strikes against command nodes and fuel, since those hits bend the route faster than hull kills. Electronic warfare will swing the tempo, yet mixed links and quick corrections keep the picture alive, so timing still favors the side that closes the loop first. After contact, the hard work continues, because medevac, prisoner handling, and unexploded ordnance control reveal discipline as much as tactics. Expect more unmanned support for resupply and casevac at the edge of the fight, since small robots and cheap airframes cut risk while keeping pressure steady. Watch the spacing of columns, the density of mines, and the pace of precision fire, because these signals will show who holds initiative in the coming weeks. For field-tested analysis on weapons, tactics, and the politics behind them, subscribe to Military Force and stay ready for the next report.